Righto, so in this video I'm going to talk about materials and also about how to split a unit and deal with splitting. So previous tutorial, if you were following along, the parameters intelligent path completion wasn't working. Closing the model and reopening currently fixes that. So add a parameter, close and reopen. Once you've got at least one parameter, everything sort of continues to get updated properly. It's just that first parameter on the first model load that causes problems. So for tutorial 3, what we're going to need, just as the previous ones have begun, we're going to need some new fields. And in this one, what we're going to be doing is splitting, in this model, we're going to split the waste material type. So if in your world you don't need to have different material types, then you can kind of skip the understanding of materials, but most models will have an understanding of different types of materials. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a waste split 1 and waste split 2. And this is what we're going to do is we're going to split the units based on their size. So we've already created size in the previous example. You could imagine this one in terms of thickness as being an option to split on thickness, but this is just an arbitrary one to show you how to split something. So we've got waste split 1 and waste split 2, and I'm just going to sum them up as well. It's generally a good idea to aggregate numbers somehow if it makes any sense. So with those fields created, the next thing you're going to want to do is create a parameter, and for this one, this is going to be called tutorial 3, and I'm just going to create a parameter for how much size I'm going to allow in each individual split. And for this example, so I'm going to have a range, I'm going to have a number, and the range is going to be everything, and the number is going to be 1.5. You'll see that it turns up as 2. That's because the format string doesn't show by default any decimal places. We can change that. So 1.5. So what that means is the things that have got a size 1, they're not going to have enough to split, so they're not going to get split, really. The ones that have more than 1.5 are going to get split into a 1.5 component and a component that is the remainder. So in our snippets, what I'm going to do is create a new data flow. Same range, same grouping expression. This time I'm going to clear tutorial 3, and I'm going to have 2 material types in this one. So this one's going to have waste and coal, and for the purposes of helping us see the difference between the two of them in the screen, I'm going to color them slightly differently. You'll see that in a moment, how they actually appear on screen when they've been colored differently. So I've got a material for waste and a material for coal. For value fields, I'm going to create size again, and I'm also going to have a volume field. So my fields have already got volume on them. My nodes, my field setup already has a volume, so I'm going to be using that, and both of these are going to be summed. Identifier-wise, I don't need anything. So materials are kind of like a special kind of identifier, in that with a material, what we can do is we can start to use input blocks. So I'm going to call this tutorial 3. I'm going to do the same thing I did before, where I have an input, a process block, and an output block, and I'm just going to make them line up. Go. It's a little untidy, but that's better. Interesting. Okay, so in the input block now, we haven't used the input blocks yet, but if you look back on your previous input blocks, we haven't touched them, and that's because we haven't had different material types and we've had no conditions on anything. In this one, I am going to have conditions on things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up whether something is a waste or a coal record. I'm going to use the volume of waste to say that a waste unit can get created. So I'm going to go with get value, import a waste volume greater than 0. That means we're going to get a unit out of this record. Then what we're going to do is enter into the volume field the imported waste volume. The simplest way to describe materials is if you don't filter them, then every leaf will get every material type. So if I don't put a filter on, everything will get waste and coal. So I'm going to do the same thing with my coal, except I'm going to say if the coal volume is greater than 0, so that being greater than 0 means it's coal, and then I'm going to put waste coal volume as the volume field, and then with size, I had previously written it back to the table, so for purposes of this, I'll grab the size as well from the previous data flow. In terms of the actual processing that we're going to do, so we need to do a lookup of a parameter again, and so I'm going to create a new snippet, and I'm going to go and grab the code from the other snippet to save myself the effort of filling most of it in. But then what I'm going to do, and you'll see that this works now with this here, is I'm going to pop tutorial3's parameter into that. And then in that parameter entry, you'll see I've got access to the attribute. Now that's because I didn't rename it. I might call this SplitSize. And if I go back to my data flow, SplitSize is now a value that's accessible from my parameter entry. Now, rather than writing to the unit.Size, I'm just going to say that SplitSize is equal to the parameter entry. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to split my unit. Now, before I go ahead and split the unit, I'm just going to pull the preview window up to show you a couple of things that have happened. So you'll see that I've got my different waste and coal materials, and at the moment, once again, they're grouped by pit strip and block, not that it's super important, but you can also see the sizes that we wrote in the previous tutorial. So we've got waste, coal, etc. Now, one of the things that we can do at this point is we can ignore, let's say for the purpose of this, we're going to ignore coal. So one of the things that I can do immediately is I can check the material type. So I can say if unit.Material equals coal. So I can use text if it's equal to coal. 2 equals for a comparison in C#, not 1. So if unit.Material equals coal, continue. If the input node is null, continue, and if the parameter is null, continue. And then where we're here now is what we're going to split it by. And so in here, units can be split, and so I'm going to create a var called split, and then it's going to be split by value or split by percentage. So in this example, we're going to be splitting by a value, but I will, in a future tutorial, introduce the concept of splitting by percentage. Both of them require an array of values to split by. So you can split by one to many values. So I might have an array of 10 series of ones, in which case every value of 1 will get split. So if I go split by value, and then the first thing I'm interested in doing is I'm splitting it on its size. So this will become clear hopefully in a moment. But then the next part of it is to feed in, and you can have a look at the different methods that it allows you to pull in, but each of them asks you for a double array. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new, and this is once again, if you're a C# person, pretty simple. Trickier if you are not, but I'm just going to put in a new double array based on the split size. There's only one entry. I could potentially add another. I'll show you a couple of different things. There's a little bit extra at the tail end of the tutorial. But that there doesn't do anything yet. the splits haven't been written back to the table. So they haven't been written back to the units. So I have this split sitting here, which is a split of the unit, but I haven't yet written that back to the table. And this is where we sort of introduce one of the trickier C# concepts. But if you want to start replacing the units list, which is the units collection as a list of individual units, if you want to replace that unit with the split component, then you actually can't for each over the units themselves. It's a tiny bit tricky, but it's this concept that we kind of need to create a copy of the unit right at the start that says lock the units as a separate list in place. So this is one extra trick that you need to do if you're going to be splitting and replacing. And then we're going to do a couple of extra things here with the split. So the split is now an array. The array will be the same size plus 1 of whatever you fed into it. So if you feed in 1 value for the split, then your split is going to actually be an array of, or a list of units that is 1 more than that. So if I split it by 1 number, I'm going to get I'm going to get 2 units back. What that means, hopefully this becomes clear, is split top is split 0. So the top part, var split bottom is split 1. If I could type, that might help. So the 0-based indices for arrays in C# or lists in C#, split top and split bottom. And then for the purposes of being able to show you how that changes, I'm going to say splitTop.Material and I'm going to write different materials to the 2 different splits. And the final thing that I need to do is replace the original unit with the split units. And so what that looks like is units.Replace split, unit with split. So replace asks you what do you want to replace and what do you want to replace it with. So that there, and it's not going to be immediately clear. So we're going to walk through it a little bit. But what you'll find is certain units, and we need to change a little bit about how our format string of our size is makes it a little tricky to see what's happening here. And go back to that preview, recalculate. So you'll see here that the 110, let's look at the 145. So I've got a split top and a split bottom now. So the split top, the first part, has the 1.5 in it, and then the remainder, the split bottom, gets 0.5. So that's the split top. That's going to be up to and including the size of the split, but no more. So if we look once again at this record that had a 999 in it, you'll see that, here we go, that the split top gets 1.5 and the split bottom 997. So the remainder is the leftovers, and that's what's left over from the split. So in this example, what we've now got is 2 different materials where there was 1 before. There's no longer going to be any waste in this system, just coal, because we skipped past the coal. And now that we have these different material types, the final thing we're going to do in this, actually there's one more thing I wanted to show you, sorry, is that the volume has also been split. And that is because the volume aggregation was set to sum. So it means that if you split something that gets summed, we're going to split it pro rata based on the size aggregation split as well. So we're splitting it based on size, but we're also going to then cut it by by an equal amount for the volume in terms of the pro rata split. So you can see that when we go from 999 to 997, we lose, 0.5% or whatever the maths is, to 0.25% of the volume from this record as well. So that's how a split works. But then what we need to do is take that split and use it and write it back to the table. So the final thing we're going to do in this one is go to the output block. This one's just for tutorial 3. We're going to use the input node again. And in the filter, we're going to use the material type. Now, one thing that will happen with new material types is until you've run the data flow, they won't appear because they haven't been added to the system yet. But once you go to run the data flow, it says, do you want to add split top? Yep. And it will also then remember to add split bottom. And we've hit our first issue, because I forgot this would run into this as well, is that if the split size is greater than the actual unit's size, so I'm trying to split it by 1.5, but the size needs to be greater than that. So the other thing that I can do here is I can say if split size is greater than the unit's size, then the split size equals the unit's size. And this just says if 1.5 is greater than what you've got, then just come down to whatever your size is. I'm not going to try and split you by more than what you're worth. So rerun that one more time. And one more check. This is because I've actually changed this tutorial a little bit. It's there's a possibility that one or both of these are null, as in if you well, 0 is never going to be null, but it's quite possible that 1 is null. So if you are splitting by the full size of the record, then split 0 actually ends up being the whole size of the first unit. It just means that there's a possibility that this split bottom is null. And if your split size was 0, there's an issue where your split top could be null as well. So the only other thing that you would want to do here is you would want to say if split top is not equal to null, and then if split bottom is not equal to null. Because for what it's worth, and this is C# learning, but this object, you can't read or write to a property of an object if that object itself is empty, or null is I suppose the correct terminology. So run that one more time, and we'll go back to our output block. And now, because we've run it and we've added those materials to our data flow, we can actually do a comparison. So we only want to write volume if the unit material is the split top. And if it is, then we're going to write the unit's volume. And we'll do the same thing for split bottom. So current material equals split bottom. We're going to write the volume, run that data flow, back to the table. You can see that we started with 108 million. Given the way that the splits work in this model, we've got 104 million on waste split 1, 4 million on split 2. And if we start playing around with that size number from the previous data flow, we'll start getting different results. So if we were to change this parameter to, let's say, 5, and then go back to our data flows and run all data flows instead of just one at a time, what's going to happen is we're actually going to end up with a different split of materials. So because the inputs on tutorial 3 are affected by the outputs of tutorial 2, that size that we write in tutorial 2, by changing the size, we change the way the split occurs. So this is where sort of data flows, you may want to do things like in tutorial 2, you may want to make sure that you're clearing tutorial 3. If things rely on each other, you might want to make sure that when you rerun tutorial 2 that you're not keeping old results from tutorial 3. So these are the kinds of things that you need to think about when logically building this stuff up. I'm going to call it at that, and I'll put the code up from this snippet onto the YouTube channel. And when I get around to it later this afternoon, I'll pop these models up and put some links in the YouTube descriptions. Hope that's helping. I know it's a lot to take on. If you've never done C# before, it can be quite a lot. But if you follow it word for word, then you'll be good to go. So anyway, thanks for your attention again, and have a good one.